I took her down, just like a boss would. She had it coming, or so I believed at the time. I'm not the type to cause a scene. I never wanted some explosive confrontation. No yelling in the street for me. No middle of the night arguments. No involvement of detectives. No piles of incriminating photos in manila folders. The division of our belongings, even the coffee maker, didn't matter to me. I didn't concern myself with her future. My focus was solely on moving forward without her. Thus, when I discovered her betrayal, when it hit me unexpectedly like an unseen slap, I chose my course of action. Quietly, decisively, I vanished. I replayed it repeatedly in my mind, imagining her entering our now empty home, calling out for me, peeking into the closet, and noticing the empty space where my clothes once were. That gradual realization dawning on her, escalating to panic. I found a strange satisfaction in that thought. Because there are things in life that you just can't forgive. Some errors don't offer a second chance. That was my response. When everything fell apart, when despair loomed over me like a dark cloud, I left silently. But let's not rush this tale. Let's begin with that cursed party. It was a chilly Friday night in December, with a biting wind from Lake Michigan piercing through my jacket. The annual company holiday bash was held at the Palmer House Hilton, a place known for its marble floors and gigantic chandeliers. I've never cared much for these gatherings. My job in construction management, being hands-on, always felt more comfortable around steel and concrete than in a suit and around fancy appetizers. But Amanda, she thrived at these events. She relished the music, the attention, the chance to dress up. She agonized over her outfit all week, finally settling on a navy blue dress that accentuated her figure perfectly. She turned heads as she entered. I was always proud to be with a woman who demanded such attention. However, that evening, she attracted the wrong sort. Stationed by the bar with a Jack and Coke, I tried to engage with some colleagues. Meanwhile, Amanda was engrossed in conversation, not with me, but with Daniel Carter, her boss. Initially, I dismissed my suspicions as mere imagination. She was just enjoying herself, laughing away. Then I noticed it. The way her fingers lingered a bit too long on his arm with each laugh. How Daniel leaned close enough that his lips almost brushed against her ear. How she tilted her head, her hair sweeping against his suit. Then came that look. That breeze, charged exchange of glances where they seemed to forget the world around them. My stomach turned. After 8 years with Amanda, I knew all her expressions. Her happy face. Her anxious face. Her pretending to care face. But this was the look of someone hiding something. My gut churned as though I'd missed a step on the stairs. I took a deliberate sip from my drink, keeping my breathing even. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. But my instincts screamed otherwise. I watched them for the next hour. She hardly looked my way. If she did, it was just a fleeting glance, as if I were a stranger. Daniel was a figure of authority, never needing to raise his voice to command attention. He was in his mid-40s, tall, well-built, always impeccably dressed. And he was married to a woman absent from the party. That fact alone made my skin crawl. I was never one to be jealous. I had always trusted Amanda completely. I never snooped through her phone, never questioned her whereabouts, never tracked her movements. But something about this night felt wrong. As the evening drew to a close, people began to leave, heading back to their cars and quiet homes. Amanda eventually came over, acting as if nothing was amiss. "Ready to leave?" she asked, her smile betraying no hint of her earlier behavior. I scrutinized her face, looking for any sign of deceit. But she returned my gaze with the same flawless smile, pretending all was as it always had been. I wanted to believe her, to think nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew otherwise. That was the moment it all began. The first hint of doubt. The first sign that my world was not as stable as I had thought. That was when I first sensed it. That subtle, nagging suspicion. And once it took root, it never left. It was Friday morning, a week after the company party. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee when she entered, already dressed for work in dark gray slacks and a fitted blazer, her hair styled neatly for an important day. "I have to go out of town tonight," she mentioned casually, as if it were just another day. "Last-minute retreat with the management team." I looked up from my coffee. "Retreat? Huh?" "Corporate thing," she added, grabbing a protein bar from the counter. "Just overnight. I'll be back tomorrow." I nodded slowly, my face unreadable. "Since when do accountants have retreats?" I inquired. She flashed a brief, dismissive smile. "It's for team building. You know, networking, leadership exercises, all that dull stuff." I just stared at her. She was lying. I had no concrete evidence, nothing but the growing suspicion since the party. But I knew. It's like sensing an impending storm from the heaviness of the air. I just didn't realize yet how severe it would be. That evening, I waited. Amanda packed light, a small black duffel bag, nothing that seemed right for a lavish corporate retreat. She kissed me on the cheek, smiling as if all was normal, and walked out the door. I watched from the window as she got into her silver Toyota Camry, backed out of the driveway, and disappeared into the dwindling daylight. I waited precisely 2 minutes before I grabbed my jacket, my phone, and my truck keys. I maintained a cautious distance as I trailed her northward, my Ford disappearing into the steady flow of vehicles on Interstate 94. The journey from Chicago to Milwaukee, just over 90 miles, was marked by the relentless pounding of my heart. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Perhaps I wished I was mistaken. Maybe I hoped she would actually arrive at a conference center, leaving me feeling foolish for my doubts. But deep down, I sensed where this was leading. Amanda was not on her way to any retreat. She was going to meet him. Milwaukee presented itself like a picturesque postcard against the winter night, its downtown area glowing, festive decorations still adorning some storefronts. The dark waters of the Milwaukee River sliced through the city, mirroring the lights and neon signs. Yet, Amanda bypassed the exits to the business districts or any conference venues. Instead, she veered off onto a side street, not far past Mitchell International Airport. That's when it became clear. A rundown motel appeared, its neon sign intermittently flickering, surrounded by a parking lot marred with cracks and dips, and a faded "no vacancies" sign hanging in the office window. Amanda parked in a secluded spot at the lot's end. I pulled into a gas station across the street, stopping at a vacant pump and pretended to busy myself with my phone while keeping an eye on her. Minutes ticked by, then another vehicle's headlights illuminated the lot. A sleek, black BMW 5 Series parked next to Amanda's car. The driver's door swung open, and there was Daniel Carter. He emerged, the epitome of a polished executive, clad in a tailored wool coat and sharp dress shoes. He circled to Amanda's side and opened her door, his manners impeccable. She looked up at him, her hand brushing his arm. Their greeting was not brief nor casual but rather intimate. From my vantage point, I could see their bodies turn towards each other, her fingers lingering on his sleeve, his head inclining subtly towards her. My breath caught, the world around me fading into a blur, sounds muffled as though I were submerged underwater. I forced myself to act, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. Hesitating only a moment over the camera app, I activated it. The screen came to life. I zoomed in, framing the shot. Amanda was laughing, her gaze fixed on Daniel. He leaned in, whispering something meant only for her. I captured the image. A moment later, his hand caressed her waist. I took another photo. Then the decisive moment, as he leaned closer, his lips brushing her neck. Click. I lowered my phone, exhaling slowly, my breath clouding the windshield. It was undeniable now. I had the evidence. Amanda and Daniel collected their bags and vanished into the motel's reception area. The door closed behind them, and I remained in the truck, my grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles hurt. My world had irrevocably shattered. From then on, I knew nothing would be the same again. The drive back was silent, the highway's hum merging with the turmoil in my mind. All doubts had been erased. There was nothing left worth fighting for. I didn't plan to confront her. What would be the point? She had already chosen her path. By the time I reached our driveway, a numbness had enveloped me. Our home, a brick two-story on a tranquil street, looked unchanged with its porch light still burning and curtains drawn. Everything appeared normal on the outside. But inside, everything had altered. I sat in my truck, staring at the home where I had once built a life that now felt as if it had ended that very night. Upon entering, my mind was made up. There would be no arguments, no pleading for explanations. I was ready to leave. The following morning, I arose as if nothing had occurred. Amanda returned shortly after 10 a.m., casually tossing her duffel bag by the door and stretching from what she implied was a taxing night of team building. She greeted me cheerily as I sat at the kitchen table, feigning interest in the newspaper. "Morning," she said, as if her night had been innocent. I forced myself to meet her gaze, examining her expression. She showed no signs of remorse, not the slightest. That confirmed everything I needed to know. She wasn't regretful and never would be. That evening, once she had gone to bed, I sat by the dim light of my laptop and began my job hunt. I was determined to leave Chicago. Over the next few days, I dedicated myself to this task. I refreshed my resume, made phone calls, and sent out applications. By week's end, I had secured a position. Nashville, Tennessee. A company in the construction supply sector needed a new site coordinator, offering decent pay. It wasn't a glamorous role, but the location was far enough for a fresh start, which was all I needed. I accepted the job without a second thought. Now, all that was left was to make my exit. For 2 weeks, I packed covertly. Each morning, I woke at 5 a.m., before Amanda even reached for her snooze button, and began boxing up my life. I packed systematically, with precision. Essential items like documents, cash, and valuables went into a duffel bag in my truck. The clothes I cared about were stuffed into a suitcase hidden in the back of my closet. Items of lesser importance I left behind. I ensured that Amanda would not notice anything amiss. I didn't remove too much at once. A few shirts here, a pair of boots there, items she wouldn't miss. My old work boots remained by the door. My jacket still hung on the rack. My tools stayed untouched in the garage. I kept the house looking as it always had. And day by day, I observed Amanda, waiting to see if she grew suspicious. She didn't. She continued with her routine, coming home late, her texts filled with unusual enthusiasm, her laughter unexplained. She thought she had deceived me. She had no clue that the deception was mine. The final step was securing a new place to live. I didn't need much, just a modest one-bedroom apartment where I could regroup and plan my next steps. At night, while Amanda showered, I browsed listings, finally choosing a simple apartment complex in South Nashville, close to my new job. It was unassuming, a plain brick building with a balcony that overlooked nothing special. But that was sufficient. I completed the lease agreement online and set up my move-in date. Everything was arranged. All that remained was waiting for the perfect moment to vanish. By the second week, the enormity of what I was about to undertake began to settle in. I was leaving behind everything, our home, our circle of friends, my entire existence in Chicago. Yet, I felt devoid of emotion. No sadness. No longing. Only a profound, steady sense of relief. The closer my departure drew, the easier I found it to breathe. Observing Amanda, noticing her secretive texts, seeing how she smiled at her phone, I harbored no anger. Only conviction. I didn't crave revenge. I didn't seek closure. I simply needed to disappear. The morning unfolded like any other. I heard Amanda's alarm at 6:30 a.m., its vibration faint against the nightstand. She groaned, hit the snooze button, and rolled over. I lay awake, gazing at the ceiling, listening. 10 minutes later, it sounded again. This time she rose. I listened to the familiar sounds, the shuffle of her feet on our hardwood floors, the creak of the closet door, the scrape of hangers. She moved to her morning ritual seamlessly, utterly oblivious to the storm on the horizon. In the kitchen, I sat with my coffee, feigning normalcy. Amanda entered, dressed for work in a burgundy blouse and black pants, her hair neatly tied back. She barely acknowledged me as she grabbed her coffee, took a sip, and glanced at her phone. Likely a message from Daniel. Busy day? I asked nonchalantly. Always, she replied absently. She slung her purse over her shoulder, the keys jangling. I've got a long one today. Probably won't be home till late. I nodded. See you then. She pecked me on the cheek, a gesture devoid of any real sentiment, and left. I watched from the window as she climbed into her Toyota Camry, reversed out of the driveway, and vanished down the street. She was gone. And now, so was I. I didn't delay. I placed my coffee cup in the sink, picked up my jacket, and headed straight for the garage. My Ford was ready, packed with a duffel bag of essentials, a suitcase of clothes, and a small box of important documents and valuables. Everything I needed to start anew. I took one last look at the house. 6 years of my life were spent here, building a future with a woman who ultimately discarded it. A place that should have felt like home. But it wasn't mine anymore. I pulled the house key from my pocket, contemplated it for a moment, then went inside and left it on the kitchen counter. No farewell note. No explanation. Nothing. Let her piece it together. I returned to my truck, climbed in, and as the garage door clattered shut, I was already driving away, heading toward Interstate 55, leaving Chicago, leaving Amanda, leaving it all behind. The miles accumulated, and Chicago's skyline receded as I drove south, past suburban sprawl and familiar exits. By the time I reached Springfield, I felt liberated. It wasn't just the distance. It was freedom. The road to Tennessee lay open before me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the burden lifting. The drive was lengthy, over 8 hours, but it didn't bother me. I traveled along Interstate 55 south, through Illinois' farmlands, vast expanses where the land stretched endlessly, and the only signs of life were isolated barns and rusted silos. Crossing into Missouri, I stopped for gas at a remote station outside St. Louis, a place off the beaten path where no one would ask questions. The cashier barely glanced up as I paid for my gas and a stale black coffee. Good. I preferred to go unnoticed. I continued onward, past Memphis, crossing familiar state lines. Each mile marker brought me closer to Tennessee, further from my old self. As I arrived in Nashville, the sky painted a deep burnt orange, the last rays of sun setting behind the hills. I pulled into the parking lot of my nondescript new apartment complex just outside the city. It was modest, but it was mine. I shut off the engine, paused to gather myself, then reached for my phone. The final step. I scrolled through my contacts, located Amanda's number, and then, without a second thought, turned the phone off. All ties cut. No calls. No texts. No explanations. Just silence. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the silence envelop me. Amanda arrived home at 8:47 p.m., weary, preoccupied, utterly unaware that her world was about to transform. She kicked off her heels in the hallway, tossing her purse onto the table as usual. The house was dark, the faint porch light casting shadows through the windows. Normally, I would have left a lamp on for her. She noticed the darkness first. She stepped into the living room, expecting to find me there, perhaps watching a late-night rerun or a talk show. But the room was silent. Too silent. "Jason," she called out. No answer. She flicked on the light and surveyed the room. That's when she saw the first clue. The coat rack by the door was bare. Her stomach clenched. She moved to the house, her heels clicking on the floor, checking all the usual spots. The kitchen? Empty. The garage? My truck was gone. She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly, sending a message. "Jason, where are you?" The message sent, but without a delivery confirmation. She frowned. Then she went upstairs. That's when the full impact hit her. The closet was half empty. My side was cleared, hangers swinging, the empty spaces glaringly obvious. She opened the dresser, expecting to find my shirts, socks, and old college sweatpants. Empty. She rushed to the bathroom, pulled open the medicine cabinet. My toothbrush, razor, cologne, all gone. Panic surged through her. She ran back to the bedroom, grabbed her phone, and dialed my number. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She stared at the screen, disbelief washing over her. Her hands trembled. Amanda tried again. And again. Nothing. Her heart raced, each breath shorter and more frantic than the last. She scrolled through her contacts and hesitated before tapping the name of someone who might know where I was. Mark. Mark had been my closest friend since our college days. He was a die-hard Bears fan and never said no to a cold beer. If anyone had a clue about my whereabouts, it was him. After 2 rings, he picked up. "Hey, Amanda. What's going on?" His voice was casual, relaxed. "Mart." She gulped, trying to stabilize her voice. "Have you spoken to Jason recently?" There was a brief hesitation. "Duh, not recently." "Why?" Amanda's throat tightened. He's gone." The pause that followed felt eternal. Mark's tone shifted. "What do you mean, Don?" She rushed her words. "I came home, and all his stuff is missing. His truck, gone. His phone's off. I can't find him anywhere." Mark was silent for a moment, the distant sounds of a TV filling the brief void, likely a basketball game. "I don't know what to tell you, Amanda." "Come on, Mark," she pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation and fear. "He wouldn't just disappear, wouldn't he?" Mark cut in. There was a stark silence. Amanda opened her mouth to retort. The words failed her. Mark sighed deeply. "Muck, Amanda, I really don't know where he is. And if I did, I don't think he'd want me telling you." Amanda's knees weakened, and she leaned heavily against the bed. "But, good night, Amanda." The wine went dead. She stared at the phone, then began scrolling again, driven by a mix of desperation and determination. Her next call was to my parents, pacing as she dialed, her heart still racing. Cincinnati, Ohio, that's where they were. My mother answered after 3 rings, her voice filled with surprise. "Amanda, is everything okay?" "Bye, Mrs. Langford," Amanda managed, her voice shaking slightly. "I was just wondering, is Jason there with you?" A heavy silence fell before my mother responded, the sound of her settling into a chair audible. "No, sweetheart," she said slowly. "Why?" Amanda pressed her hand against her forehead. "I don't know where he is. He's just gone. His stuff, his phone. I thought maybe he'd come to see you." Another pause, deeper and more somber. Then my mother exhaled slowly. "Amanda, I don't think Jason wants to be found." The word struck Amanda like a physical blow. "What?" "No, he wouldn't just leave." My mother's voice was calm but firm. "He would." Amanda felt the room closing in, a nauseous pressure building in her chest. She quickly thanked my mother and ended the call before she could break down. By 10:30 p.m., Amanda had exhausted all options. She called my office straight to voicemail. Checked her email, no messages from me. She reached out to every mutual friend she could think of. Nobody had any idea where I was. It was as if I had simply vanished into thin air. She sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed, running her fingers through her hair, unsure of her next move. Powerlessness was a foreign feeling to her, but now it enveloped her completely. I was gone, and she had no clue if I would ever return. Deep down, she probably understood why I had disappeared, but that brought little comfort. The first morning in Nashville was surreal for me. I woke up before dawn, lying on a mattress on the floor of my new, bare apartment. The smell of fresh paint lingered, and the only other sound was the hum of the mini fridge I picked up from Home Depot. It was simple, but it was all mine. No voices from another room. No tension hanging in the air. No need to measure every word. For the first time in a long while, I was alone, and it felt like freedom. The job began a couple of days later. It wasn't glamorous, a construction supply company on the outskirts of the city, a small but reliable business. They needed someone skilled in logistics, able to oversee job site deliveries and ensure orders ran smoothly. It was exactly the kind of work I excelled at. Early mornings, long hours, but no stress beyond ensuring everything was where it needed to be. I didn't have to sit for meetings, didn't have to engage in office politics, didn't have to worry about anything except my work and going home. The crew was a good mix of veterans and newcomers, all just there to earn their paycheck. I kept to myself, and that suited everyone just fine. New guy, huh? One of the older workers, Jim, asked on my second day. Yeah, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee and keeping it vague. Jim just grunted and returned to his work. I appreciated that about this place. No one pried too much. After work, I discovered a modest bar a few blocks from my apartment. It wasn't fancy, just a quiet place with a few pool tables and a jukebox that played old Johnny Cash tracks. Mick, the bartender, was a stocky man in his 50s who looked like he'd been lifting kegs his whole life. He was a man of few words, often cleaning an already spotless bar. I took to him right away. First time here? He asked as I settled onto a bar stool. Yeah, I answered. What do you have? He asked, straightforward. Just a beer, I replied. He grabbed a Budweiser, popped the cap, and set it in front of me without any fuss. No small talk. No prying questions. Perfect. I spent the hour sipping my beer, watching the muted TV above the bar. The regulars drifted in and out, chatting about the upcoming Titans game, complaining about work, and sharing laughs over things I didn't know or care to learn about. I was invisible, and that was exactly what I needed. Days turned into weeks, following a simple pattern. Wake up, worked, did the bar, then sleep. No drama, no suspicion, no wondering about Amanda's texts or whereabouts. For the first time in years, I felt no need to prove anything to anyone. And that, frankly, was a relief. One evening, Jim from work ended up at Mick's bar. He took the stool next to mine, giving me a nod. Didn't peg you for a drinker, he commented. I'm not, I replied, taking a sip of my beer. He smirked. Right. He didn't probe further, just ordered a beer for himself and joined me in watching the TV. It was the first genuine conversation I'd had outside of work in a long time, and it was refreshing. Just two guys at a bar, no expectations, no pretenses. Eventually, he turned to me. You got family around here? I shook my head. Nope. No girlfriend. Either. He nodded, as if it all made sense to him. Yeah, he muttered. You seem like a guy who's starting over. I tensed up a bit. Is it that obvious? Jim just shrugged. Been around long enough to recognize the look. He took another sip of his beer. Don't worry. Nobody cares what you left behind. I didn't respond, because for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I didn't care either. Whatever I left behind in Chicago, it wasn't my problem anymore. Amanda wasn't ready to give up. When calling my friends and family turned up nothing, she took more desperate measures. She started actively searching for me. First stop was my parents' place. I knew because my dad left me a voicemail. Hey son, Amanda stopped by today. She's really worried. We told her we haven't heard from you. But what's happening? I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Amanda must have stood at their front door, full of questions, searching for any clue. But there was nothing to find. I hadn't told my parents anything, not out of mistrust, but because the less they knew, the better for everyone. After striking out in Cincinnati, she likely drove back to Chicago, checking all the places I might be. The bars I frequented, the gym where I worked out, even our old favorite diner where we used to have Sunday breakfasts, hoping maybe I'd be there, sitting in our usual spot, acting like everything was normal. But I wasn't there. I was nowhere to be found. And the more she looked, the clearer it must have become to her that I had truly disappeared. Eventually, probably a week or two later, she did the only thing left she could think of. She filed a missing person report. I can picture her in a stark, gray office at the Chicago Police Department, sitting across from an officer who'd heard similar stories many times before. He just disappeared, she likely said, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The officer would have asked routine questions. Did he take anything with him? Any signs he was planning to leave? Amanda, still half in denial, would have shaken her head. No, I don't think so. But then, it must have dawned on her. The missing clothes. The truck gone. The empty spaces where my belongings had been. I wasn't missing. I had left. And I didn't want to be sound. The report would end up going nowhere. A grown man. No health issues, no signs of foul play, just gone. The police would label it a voluntary disappearance, file it away, and move on. Amanda would leave the station with more questions than answers, sitting in her car, gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly ahead. For the first time since entering the empty house, she'd have to accept the harsh truth. I was out there somewhere. 6 months had passed since I left Chicago. 6 months since I saw Amanda heading to work, coffee in hand, unaware she'd never see me again. 6 months of silence, of rebuilding, of rediscovering who I was without her. I had no idea how she found me. Maybe she hired someone. Maybe she spent every waking moment digging through my past, calling old acquaintances, or tracking down financial records. Maybe it was just a stroke of luck. But none of that mattered now. Because there she was, standing on my doorstep. It was a late Saturday afternoon in Nashville, the air thick with humidity, the distant hum of cicadas blending with the occasional rumble of passing trucks. I had just come home from a long day at work, sweaty and tired, looking forward to a quiet evening. But instead of the solitude I craved, I opened my door to find Amanda. She was a shadow of the woman I left behind. Her usually immaculate hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, stray strands stuck to her damp face. She wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, a far cry from her usually meticulous attire. But it wasn't just her appearance that was different. It was her eyes, red-rimmed and empty. She'd clearly been crying, and for how long, I couldn't guess. We stood there for a moment, the setting sun casting long shadows, the silence between us heavy. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse as if she'd been yelling or crying for hours. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Why did you leave?" She took a shaky step forward, her hands trembling. "I've been looking for you everywhere," she whispered. I had played out this scene in my mind countless times during those first weeks after leaving, wondering what I would say if she ever found me. Would I confront her? Demand explanations? Make her justify every lie? Every moment she spent with Daniel, every excuse she ever offered? But standing there, seeing her in front of me, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a clear, calm finality. Amanda took another step, her hands wringing together. Then she began to unravel. "I was wrong, okay?" she choked out. "I messed up. I should never have." Her voice broke, and she struggled to continue. She wiped at her eyes, swallowing hard. "I love you. We can fix this. Just give me a second chance," she pleaded. The same Amanda who had always dismissed problems, who rolled her eyes whenever I fell down, who never admitted her faults, was now begging. And yet, I felt indifferent. I had spent too many nights in that empty house in Chicago, thinking about her choices. How easily she walked into that motel. How smoothly the lies came to her. I was no longer that man. The silence lingered between us. A car drove by, its radio loud with country music. A dog barked in the distance. Amanda waited, waiting for forgiveness, waiting for me to let her back into my life. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "You should go," I said simply. She blinked, taken aback as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "What?" she asked, incredulous. "You should go," I repeated firmly. Her expression collapsed into despair. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, just talk to me." She reached out, her fingers briefly touching my arm, but I stepped back, just out of her reach. Her hand fell to her side. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. But people fix things. That's what we do. We fix things." I looked at her, really looked, and it hit me. She wasn't crying because she loved me. She was crying because she had lost control. For the first time, she couldn't manipulate the outcome. She couldn't smooth it over with a clever excuse or a hollow promise. She had lost me, and she knew it. I didn't respond. Instead, I just took another step back and closed the door. She didn't knock, didn't scream, didn't try to force her way in. She just stood there outside for a few minutes, her breathing uneven, her fist clenched at her sides. I stayed by the door, hand on the knob, listening. The silence stretched out. She was still there. I knew, waiting for the door to open again, hoping I'd change my mind, that I'd say we might work things out. But there was nothing more to say. I had given her the chance to speak, to cry, to apologize. I listened to her excuses, her pleas, her attempts to rewrite what had happened. Now, it was my turn. I opened the door again. She was right there, just as I expected, fist clenched, body shaking, eyes wide with a mix of hope and despair. My voice was calm, icy, decisive. "Get off my doorstep." Amanda flinched, her mouth opened as if she wanted to say something, but then she closed it, stopping herself. "I'll send the divorce papers," I added. Then, I handed her an envelope. She hesitated but finally took it, her fingertips brushing mine. Her hands trembled as she looked down and slowly opened it, pulling out a single printed photo I had taken outside that motel in Milwaukee, her and Daniel, his hand on her waist, his lips at her neck. The undeniable proof of everything she had denied. She gasped, a quiet, pained sound escaping her lips. On top of the photo was my wedding ring. She stared at it, her fingers closing around the metal, her breathing uneven. "Please," she whispered, so faintly it was almost lost. I didn't reply. I was already stepping back inside, closing the door between us for the last time. She didn't attempt to stop me, didn't try to come in. She just stood there, clutching what remained of our life together as if it still meant something. The door clicked shut. I heard her sobbing, deep and raw, then the sound of her footsteps as they started slow and then hastened, as if she had finally accepted the reality of the situation. The sound of a car door slamming echoed, followed by the engine starting and the tires crunching against the pavement as she drove away. I stood there until the sound faded into the distance, until the only noise was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Finally, I exhaled deeply and walked away from the door, from the past, from everything that Amanda and I had once been. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. What do you think about the protagonist's choice to disappear in this way? If you were in his shoes, would you have handled the situation differently? If you enjoy this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit like. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.